And 47 Senate Republicans, including leadership, furious with President Obama, accusing him of ignoring the Constitution and going around the Senate in nuclear negotiations with Iran. But today, it is President Obama's turn to be furious. Those 47 Republicans doing their own end run around the president, issuing their own warning directly to the government of Iran. Their message? That any nuclear deal without congressional approval could be reversed by the next president with just a signature. And just hours ago, the White House firing back.
I would describe this letter as the continuation of a partisan strategy to undermine the president's ability to conduct foreign policy and advance our national security interests around the globe.
I think it's somewhat ironic to see some members of Congress wanting to make common cause with the hardliners in Iran. It's an unusual coalition.
And one of the senators behind that letter, Senator Dan Sullivan from the great state of Alaska, joins us. Nice to see you, sir.
Great to be on the show. Thank you.
Why this letter? 47 Republicans, senators, why this letter?
Well, look, I mean, I think what we're doing, and by the way, it's a very bipartisan focus.
Well, except it's all Republicans.
But I mean, the point right now is, whatever the agreement is, Congress needs to vote on that agreement. And that's the key point in the letter. And so I think you're going to see a lot of Democrats, they didn't sign the letter, but there's a lot of Democratic senators who agree with the point that a agreement of this magnitude that would only be between the president, John Kerry, and no one else, Congress not weighing in, you're going to see growing bipartisan support that Congress needs to vote on this agreement. You know, the Ayatollah, real quick, the Ayatollahs mentioned that they're going to send the agreement for approval to the Iranian parliament, but the U.S. Congress is not going to be able to vote on it. To me, that's remarkable.
Okay, here's what I think is remarkable, is that the Senate is not putting the president's feet to the fire. I think this is a treaty. And if you look at Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, it says it has to be ratified by the U.S. Senate by a supermajority, 67 votes. I don't know why in the world you aren't really hammering the president with that, and instead you run and go to the Ayatollah, and I don't know why you go running off to the Ayatollah. You should be hammering the president of the United States. No international executive order where he goes alone. This is a treaty just like the one. This is exactly like the one he negotiated with Russia, the START treaty. It was about nuclear reduction. And it was one that had to do with inspections. It's the same thing.
Well, look, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. What we need to see are the details, and then we can determine whether it's a treaty.
But demand it.
Well, we're certainly demanding to see the details. Absolutely. You know, and you mentioned there was some talk today. This was unprecedented. What's unprecedented is to have the president and Secretary of State saying they're going to negotiate a nuclear agreement. You know, these civilian nuclear agreements are called 123 agreements. The last 20 of those have gone to the Senate, as you say, for the advice and consent of the U.S. Senate. So we need a vote on that. And what we were doing in the letter was informing the leadership of Iran that if this doesn't get the vote of the Congress, it's not going to have a lot of...
the problem is, though, I think Iran is watching. I think they know that. It has the effect when you have when you get brought into our dirty laundry, our sort of political squabbles in this country, and you go to our enemies, or they're our enemy, and you go to their enemy and you sort of like send a letter to them. Yeah, I think it looks bad. It's like, you know, what you should be doing if you've got a beef with the president, you know, I know there's a standing issue, but take him to court. You know, demand that we do things within the Constitution. And I just don't. And I saw there 47. It's almost everybody. It's almost unanimous. But for some reason, I don't like the idea of end running to the Iran.
Well, it's not end running to the Iranians. What's going on here is that you have seen the president obviously is telling the Iranians, and John Kerry is telling the Iranians that Congress does not need to be involved.
And I think he's wrong.
And I think he's wrong too. And what we were doing is we were trying to enlighten the Iranian leadership on what happens if the Congress is not involved. Obviously, the president is telling the Iranians that he doesn't need Congress's involvement. And to me, that's the key issue here. We need Congress's involvement, whether as a voting on it as an agreement or, as you say, as a treaty. When we see the details, we'll make that determination. But this is too important of an issue in terms of our national security not to have the co-equal branch of government involved.
He says he was the president says he was a constitutional professor, taught constitutional law at the University of Chicago. Well, you ought to read the Constitution.
I agree.
Because I think,
absolutely.
And it's, I think this is terrible what he did, but I just, anyway, you know how I feel. Anyway, nice to see you, Senator.
Great to see you, Greta, as always. Thank you.